This is the Texas Land Guys podcast, hosted by brothers Tim Dosch and Tom Dosch. With their partners David Marshall and Trip Rich, they have built DMRE, the leading land brokerage in Texas. With decades of experience brokering deals between landowners and real estate developers, they take you inside the deals that move the market.
All right, welcome to the podcast. Tim, how are you doing this morning?
Doing great. Ready to go.
Good. Well, we're still here finishing up summer. And I know one thing that both you and I have been doing a lot this summer is reading. And so appreciate you recommending the book by Dan Sullivan earlier this summer that you had read, I guess, on your way to Europe, right?
Yeah. 10X is better than 2X. And I think I recommended that book, and you've read like 8 books since then. So you've been on a reading tear. I've done a little bit of reading. I did listen to that book on the way to Europe, and I thought it was a really impactful book. I'm interested to hear your thoughts, but I think that it sounds kind of crazy. It's like, if it's hard to go from where I am today to double where I am today, how could I do 10 times? You know, it seems kind of like it doesn't make any sense, but his whole kind of thought process in the book is what it takes to go 10X is completely just, starting over and not doing everything the way you've been doing it, but doing it a new way and thinking outside the box and being creative and getting rid of a lot of the things that we do that are not really giving us a result that we want. And then really leaning into the things that we do that are really giving, going towards that result that we're trying to go for. So our strengths, building on our strengths and then removing our weaknesses and passing those off to a team and really getting your team to work well together. And a lot of really good concepts in the book that I think kind of help flesh that out.
Yeah, that was, I remember when you first told me about the book, and I was obviously familiar with Dan Sullivan, a strategic coach, and we've had friends that have gone through that. And we went through a different leadership program called the Master's Program that's more Christian-based. It was a incredible program, but just some of the things you learn in those programs can be so life-changing. It's just perspective change. And when you first told me about the book, my initial thought, because I'm a grinder, executor kind of a person. That's kind of my my fallback. And he talks a lot about that in the book, because those kind of people, like you said, think, well, if I want to grow next year, what did we do last year? And we'll just do more of it. And that's how we'll grow. So it's like if we worked 40 hours a week then if we worked 45 hours a week, then we should be able to grow by the same percentage. And it's, I think for me, what was really transformational was the concept of like really having bigger goals. And by having bigger goals, you can't just work harder. It forces you to realize that this isn't just an effort. Like effort's always going to be there, but this is going to be about a new framing of tackling the problem and the concept. And so a lot of fun. I've already recommended it to a couple of people. I know a couple of the guys here reading it, Trip and Trey, and we're talking about it. And that's been really, really just good for the business, good for personal, because he talks a lot in the book also just about like your personal life, because it's not just about, doing more and growing 10X because you want to make a lot more money or be a lot more successful. It's more about like, what is it that you're trying to achieve? And so he talks about like, you can have freedom in time, freedom in money, freedom in relationships, and freedom in purpose. And I think that I really resonate with the freedom and purpose, because I know we're very purpose-driven individuals, purpose-driven company. And we know, and we've talked about, money ultimately becomes really empty. And that's not what God intended for us, to just pursue money. And so I thought the book was really interesting, because he really has you, how are you uniquely gifted? What are your unique goals? And really kind of thinking about those things. And so, yeah, that was a great recommendation.
I think an analogy that kind of helps me think about it is I also listened to a long interview with Elon Musk this summer, and just thinking about, he's taking on these like crazy challenges, building an electric car and what he's doing with Tesla, and then like going to Mars. And he has these crazy audacious goals that seem impossible, but the things that you have to figure out when you reverse engineer, going to Mars, or, going and actually, putting people on the moon, and some of these things that they're talking about, the technological advances and the problems that get solved through doing that have so many other valuable uses just here on Earth. And we've seen that with the space travel over time. And so I think when you start thinking that way, thinking about how would we, if we wanted to achieve this goal, whatever it is, like you said, it may not be a money goal. Maybe it's a time goal. I mean, maybe it could even be in your family. How could I be more purpose-driven in my family? How could I be more present with my kids, with my wife? How could I grow that relationship? What would that future look like that I really desire? And then reverse engineering that and starting to think in a way of what would have to happen to get there. I think it's such a valuable process to go through. And it's actually, I think we're both kind of liking this. It's really fun to actually go through that process. It's kind of exciting and motivating to do that.
Well, that's interesting because one of the things I was realizing reading the book was that I think what holds a lot of people back is just fear. You don't want to change the way you are because especially if you've been doing something for a long time the same way, because you're competent in that, maybe you're confident in that, and you don't have the courage to step out and believe that you can pass that on to someone else. But there's really going to be no growth if you're not willing to let go of things. And I think a lot of times our identity and our value is in the things that we are good at or can do. And so, but you got to be able to let go of that to challenge yourself to do something at a higher level. And so that really spoke to me because I find myself still doing a lot of things that other people are ready to do. I'm just doing them. And so those people can't do them. And he talks about that in the book, the concept of go on vacation so that the people at the office have you gone so that they can do work. And you're not the one constantly, inserting yourself. And for the type of personality I have, that can be kind of hard. And it's good to sometimes get away. And, when I got away over the summer, team did incredible. We had all kinds of, achievements we had, hurdles we broke through. It was like they didn't miss a beat. It's obviously fun to get back and feel like I still am needed here. But it's also exciting to see the team rise up like that. People like Trey here in Dallas that are just doing such a good job leading, and Ryan and guys like John and Joey and Matt and, just a number of different guys that have really stepped up, that while I was out, we're working hard. So that was a great one. And you sent me a podcast that I listened to around the same time where Mr. Wonderful was being interviewed.
Oh yeah.
And I've always thought he had a pretty funny personality on Shark Tank, but he was talking about working with Steve Jobs, and I didn't realize that he had worked a lot with Steve Jobs. And so it was a lot of like reminiscing on that. But there's a concept that he talked about that you and I have talked about several times since listening to the podcast. And it was Steve Jobs was very focused on like, what are your big 3 tasks of the day today? And it was the idea of like the signal and the noise and staying focused on the signal. And everything was about the signal and the goal and where they were trying to get at Apple. And the noise was everything else. And he talks about, Mr. Wonderful says that he thinks Steve Jobs was 80% signal and like 20% noise. And Elon Musk is the only person Mr. Wonderful's ever seen that's 100% signal. Like everything is about what he's focused on, what he wants to do. And, it's a concept that we had already kind of talked about. It's like focusing the one thing. We do big 3s as a team all the time, but that idea of having clarity around where you're going. And like you said, really big goals and not being worried if people are making fun of you or don't necessarily like you, but saying this is the goal that we're trying to accomplish and come around. And so that was another pretty interesting one, just, to listen to and hear his experience. He said he didn't I think it was that he didn't necessarily like Steve Jobs or Steve Jobs didn't like him. He was more just, impressed by Steve's focus and what he was able to accomplish, but sadly not a very relational guy at the end of the day.
Yeah, he was definitely super difficult to work with and, I think pretty tough on his people, but he was a visionary and he was someone that wasn't one to sacrifice the vision, just to make everybody happy. And so there are some things you can take from his leadership style in his life and the impact he's had has been unbelievable. And I think you can say the same about Elon Musk. But I think a point that we can kind of draw from all that is it's so easy, especially now. I'm almost my mid-40s. I guess I'm 43, almost 44, so call up my mid-40s. But I think there's this tendency early in your career that you work really hard and you learn and you put yourself in all these situations to grow because you have to, because you have no idea what you're doing and you have to grow. But then there's a something that can happen, I think, to all of us as we get into middle age, where you can start to atrophy and you can start to just keep doing things the same way and keep kind of punching the clock. And that can be, not just in business. It can be in your marriage. It can be as a dad. It can be, your physical health. your muscles are atrophying because you're not working out. You're numbing yourself with, Netflix or alcohol, or whatever it is. And so you stop being growth minded. And I think one of the most important things, especially in the world we live in today, where things are moving so quick with AI and social media and all these things that are just, I think AI is tripling every year, so it's not even, a year that it takes to double, it's tripling every year. And it's just exponential growth, and the way it's changing everything. It's going to be so critical, and it is so critical to be adaptable and to learn and to grow. And what was working last year, or even last month, may not be what we need to keep doing, because maybe there's something new we need to do. And so I think, like you're saying, being willing to hold loosely to some things that maybe were super important, or, things that you think you're good at that aren't as valuable anymore, and trying to figure out, where is that value that I can offer? And as a company, what is the direction we go? And a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we're changing stuff all the time, because everything's changing all the time. You can't just keep going with the same plan that you were doing 3 years ago. You got to adjust, and you got to grow. And so I think reading these books and listening to these podcasts, and then actually taking the time to do the deep work and the thinking and journaling and processing it is really important. And I don't think it's ever been as important as it is today.
Yeah. And I think we've recognized for a long time that if you're going to lead a organization, and if we're trying to be the best land brokerage in the state of Texas, we want to be doing the best job across the entire state. We want to be doing the most deals. We want to be working with the clients and have that type of reputation where the quality of the work you're going to get when you hire us. It takes so much more than just thinking about doing deals all the time. And so we've invested a lot in technology over the years, and you're bringing up AI and just so many changes related to that, and how if you're not adaptive and open to change, then it's amazing what I thought getting into the business about technology and how it was going to be a game changer versus like what's actually happened, and how much more it's going to be a game changer, just realizing that now. And so I think for us, this is, all the podcasts and books and things we're doing, we're always trying to challenge ourselves and trying to encourage our other leaders to grow. If you're not growing, I'm reading another book now, and he's like, business is basically like war. It's like people are, every business, he talked about it, the top companies in the world in 1955, it's just the top list of, I think it was 500
was
companies.
It like the Dow or something?
Yeah, it was like the Dow. I can't remember which one it was, but it was like 500 companies. And he said that only 50 of those are still around.
Wow.
And so you think about that, those were the top, and that was 70, 80 years ago, and only 10% are around. And he was just talking about, whether it's bankruptcy or whether it's being acquired or, whatever the reason is, it's like people get complacent. So you're talking about atrophy. And so the longer you're doing something, and the more maybe you start believing how great you are, or that you have the way to do it, and and you're not watching what's happening around you, there's always these threats. And so he talks about Jobs and some of these other guys that just were always a little bit paranoid about having to improve, because you have to always believe that tomorrow somebody could be better. And so if you're not improving yourself and trying to improve the team and trying to just build, the right team, then it's very easy that competition is going to come in and could take your place. So there's a lot that we do get to apply to our business with this too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's great. Well, I think what we're going to talk about today is the whole idea of, should you sell right now or should you hold? Just thinking about a lot of our sellers, and be interested to hear, Tom, what you're telling people. I think we're in a kind of an interesting time right now. This is being recorded in July of 2025. And we thought early in the year things were going to come back. We were hoping for some rate cuts. There was a lot of momentum in the market first quarter, with developers tying up sites, making offers. Pricing was moving up. And then similar to what's happened really in 23 and 24, we got into the second quarter and a lot of those deals fell apart. I think the tariffs that started, I think in April was when that started, really shook everybody up. And then the fact that rates haven't fallen at all. Now we have a situation where we had a tariff pause that helped the market. I don't know if it impacted real estate that much, but definitely helped the stock market. And now you have Trump going back again and pushing on the tariffs again and making some deals, but there's still some big, the EU, India, China, some of these big countries where there's no deal. And so that will be a negotiation. Who knows if that's something that gets resolved in August or if that goes through the fall and goes longer, and what level of impact that will have. And then I think at the same time, Trump being very vocal about how he wants Powell to be gone and he would love to fire Powell, and he's going to replace Powell with somebody who's going to cut rates, like in half, and really lower things dramatically, which I think would obviously have a huge impact on the market. So curious to hear just kind of what you're telling your sellers and how you're seeing the market. And I think with this whole question of do you sell or do you hold, it's a very nuanced question for each seller, and it depends on their site and a lot of the characteristics of their site, the use type, what their goals are. There's not a one-size-fits-all answer that we could apply to everybody. And so there's probably some sellers you're saying, hey, let's go sell it today. Let's go take this offer. And then there's some sellers you're saying, you know what? If we get this number and this kind of deal, let's sell. But if we don't, let's wait, kind of see what things hold for us maybe later in the fall.
Yeah, you're right. There's not going to be just a black and white answer in every situation. That's just not possible. But maybe I could break it down to say that there's maybe, and this would be simplifying it, but two different conversations happening. One would be with developers that own properties that because of what's happened, you had COVID, you had a land rush, and then you had interest rates spike. And so you had a lot of developers get what they call land heavy. So they bought land properties and then they own them. And that's not normal in our business that developers own land. They like to close on land and immediately have a construction loan and start building. They don't want to just own land. So conversations with that group of individuals, and that's been a lot of what we've been working on. Because if you think about the market we've been in, the other group is like the family or the very patient seller that's just owned the property a long time. So it wouldn't have to be a family. It could be an institution. It could be a company. But those type of sellers, it's been not the greatest time to go and set a record on pricing. Now, it depends on, again, our business is complicated. And so maybe if it's an industrial site in a certain location, or if it's a irreplaceable urban site, or maybe a single family site, because the single family market has been so strong, then yeah, it's been a great time to go sell your farm that you've owned for 100 years and make a lot of money. But we've seen that change a little bit the first, and I guess now the beginning of this third quarter, kind of first half of this year, because of what you're talking about in the capital markets. And so developers, I just really am asking a lot of questions around what's your business plan? Because if your business plan was that you were going to buy the property in 2021 or 2022, maybe you bought it in 2023, sometime in that time period, and your plan was you were going to go build a project, and now we're sitting in the second half of 2025, and you haven't done that. So you've owned the property anywhere from 12 on the short end to some of these developers have owned it for 36 months. So you've owned a property for several years. Now us sitting on the Ascent side where we own our own properties and we have our own business plan and we're looking at IRR for our investors and we're looking at multiple. I always understood that, but it was a lot more theoretical until I was managing, our own investments. And so now I'm recognizing just how important it is for a lot of these developers to seriously consider going and selling instead of waiting. Because if we were having this conversation 18 months ago, 12 months ago, the outlook was so positive for right now being like a very strong time in the market to be able to go get capital. Rates were expected to be down. And you would have thought that if you were out in the market, you could be getting really strong pricing. Fast forward to now, we're all kind of believing that that's probably what's happening again in 6 to 12 months, that rates come down, things really pick up, but we don't know what's going to happen. Yet there are opportunities to sell right now. And so there's a lot of cases now where even in a what you could say is a challenging environment, we're advising these developer clients, go out now, here's where we think the values are. We're hitting those values. You can get it sold. And if things do improve, all that's really going to do is raise the likelihood that your deal closes and probably almost make it like a sure thing, because things improve. It's easier to get a loan. It's easier to get capital than if you wait, trying to time the market. And so if you wait and time the market, a couple of things can happen. You can wait and it works out. You perfectly time the market and you get this really high price and it eventually closes. Now, it still probably won't close for, even in a hot market, 6+ months. So if you wait a year, you're maybe going to be able to close in like 18 months. And that's like perfectly timing the market, which likely won't happen. Or maybe you decide that you're going to wait because it's going to be a better market and it's not. And so you pretty much find yourself in the same market 9 to 12 months from now. And so now you're looking at selling, but you're going to be closing however long you waited, that much longer out in the future, and the pricing could be about the same. Or you're going to wait and the market may actually not improve and it may actually not stay the same. It could get a little bit worse in either pricing or demand for your property, or just duration of deals, like how long it's going to take for it to close could extend. And so these are the type of conversations we're having, and it's going to depend. But I think a lot of developers are making the choice to sell because they've been playing that waiting game now for so long. And when I say long, I mean 2 years for a developer is a long time to be holding land. And so now they're making that decision to sell.
I think your point's so good about timing, because just the contract to close time frame. And I think people forget sometimes that land is not a liquid asset. It trades really fast. I mean, there are times where we see really fast deals, but those are typically investor deals that are a lower price where someone's just closing all cash quickly. And those might be a 30 to 60 day deal. But most sellers are not necessarily looking at that kind of an exit. They're hoping to get, more of a market price. And so those deals, could take, 6 months on the quick end, like you said, to 9 or 12 months. And so, waiting, you could easily wait a little bit too long. We've seen this happen a lot where groups miss the early cycle because they wait and wait and wait. They wait a little bit too long, so they get late in the cycle. And speaking of like whether it's industrial or multifamily, some of these use types, but you'll get supply start to happen around you. 3 deals get announced in your submarket. We have this issue right now in Magnolia where a number of deals have gotten announced, and you have softening rents in the submarket. And so, I mean, it may be hard to exit that deal. And so you could wait so long that then you're holding it through another cycle. We've even seen this with families where it's literally for 10 years, they've been hoping that the market gets a little bit better. And what can be frustrating about land is a lot of times land prices don't continue to go up like in this straight line over time. There's areas that do go up over time, these little geographic submarkets where there's a lot happening and they're gentrifying, and they do appreciate over time. But there's also areas where the prices will soften. Even in a 10-year period, you might see a 25% reduction in land prices for various reasons. Then maybe that submarket falls out of favor, or use types don't work there anymore. So I think it's a really important thing to think through strategically. What's my goal, and am I concerned about being stuck with this property 18 months from now if things don't play out the way I'm hoping that they do play out?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking about a deal in Houston that's been on the market. It's a multifamily site. It's in a good area. It's in the kind of Woodlands Spring area. One of the hotter areas, if you just looked at where has development been like the last 10, 15 years in Houston because of Exxon and all the growth. And this property, we aren't listing it. It's another broker, but it's been on the market that whole time. Yeah. They've had it. And so there's a couple things going on there. But I think one of them is just not choosing to really, like, they do want to sell, but not choosing to align with market. And on any of these deals, if you have to hold something 10 years, and we've looked at this a lot on our deals when we're underwriting, you have to sell it for so much more money at the end of 10 years to make sense of that. Like, for example, if you sold it, for $10 million today or $15 million 10 years from now, that's not a good outcome. Like that sounds like a great outcome. It's like, wow, that's a huge percentage increase, but not over 10 years. I mean, you could invest in so many other things that would return multiples and multiples of that over the next 10 years. Unfortunately, though, that's what happens with a lot of land. And so the other seller that I'm advising a lot are more of these patient land sellers, and they're really trying to time the market. And a lot of times with them, it is similar thing. They probably don't have a business plan, but it's asking them like, what are you really trying to accomplish? And it's normally a number, because a lot of people in that situation are looking at their land as more of their retirement. It's like they didn't maybe ever know that this property that was going to be passed down, or this property they have would be worth this much money. So they're looking at this as like, I get one shot. what they're not even really thinking about is like the reinvestment potential. And so a lot of times it's trying to help them think about that too. Like you could sell this property for, let's say 8 million, because that's just what it's worth today. You really want 10. But what I'm telling you is here's the market, here's what's going on. If you want to sell it for 10, we shouldn't go out today. If you're willing to sell it for 8 instead of waiting, we're not sure how long that this property could potentially be worth 10, then you could go and reinvest that. You could reinvest it in the stock market. You could 1031 into another property. There's a lot of different things that you could do with it. And so there's so much that comes into those type of decisions. Like there's a property that we're actually purchasing right now with Ascent, and that landowner selling at what I think it's a good number for him. It's a good number for us. It's a good outcome. His main motivation was that there's a huge development coming in around him. Now, from the standpoint of like maximizing, if he was to wait a couple more years, I think he could sell it for some more, but he lives there. And he's like, I don't want to live here in November when this development opens, because it's completely going to change, what it's looked like for me to be here for the last decades. It's just not going to be a good place to be anymore. And so for him, a great outcome was selling. And the other thing you want to think about is what could you go purchase? And so because of where we are in the market, he's selling a 20-acre property that's going to be surrounded by a lot of industrial. Used to be a beautiful area, that was country and just, really great place to feel like you're out of the city. He's moving to 210 acres with the house that's probably, 5 times as nice. And he's doing that, and he's actually going to have some money in his pocket. So it's like he's 10 times in the size of the land. He's getting a way nicer property. He's got money in his pocket. That's a great investment too, just moving out to that other property. So a lot of times you're so focused on this specific property, not realizing there could be more. And I think it's probably a scarcity mindset that we all tend to have at times. It's like, I'm holding so tightly to this property and getting a certain number. I'm not even thinking about like the quality of my life, what I could do with the money, another investment, or even just, selling and enjoying it and maybe downsizing. So that's a lot of the type of conversations we're having. It's fun that our business is not really black and white, because we can sit there and advise, and we can say, I'll take this out to market, but this is not my recommendation. If that's your goal, like this is what I would expect. And we can also sit there and say, now's the time. Like I'm very confident now's the time. We need to go because of what's happening in the market.
Yeah. And the opportunity cost is such a great point, because the guy that you're talking about, I know we've talked about him and his new buy. The buy he's making is incredible. I mean, it's going to be a really good investment. He's going to make a lot of money on that over time. I know that's not his focus. He's just wanting a nice place to live. But there's a lot to be said for getting a good price and not holding on for every last little bit, but then using that money to go make another investment of some sort and then gain a higher return on it. And certain sites will tend to just kind of plateau for years, where you don't really see much of a change in value. Maybe there's 10% up or down, or maybe it's 20%, but there's a lot of investments where you could easily make up that 10%. And maybe maybe it's 15% every year or something. There's a lot of great investments you can look at. So I think that's a good point. I think another thing that we look at a lot here in Houston is there's different kinds of sites. I mean, there's certain sites that are teed up where the market will value those differently. And those may be able to run up a little bit in price in a hot market, because everything's figured out. There's no entitlement issues. There's no utility issues. It's the right size site. It's very efficient. There's a lot of things about it that developers will immediately be like, all right, this is a deal. Then there's other sites, that we're also working on where there's no utilities. Maybe we have to annex into mud. There's potential wetlands. There's all kinds of issues that need to be figured out. And so if you've gone through a process, you've had a number of offers, and you have a very quality, sophisticated developer who's saying, hey, I'm at the table, ready to make a deal. I can go through the mud process. I can figure out wetlands. I can figure out these different issues. By the way, I'm paying a really good price that's maybe above market today because they went through that process and they really stretch for the property and they believe in it and they have good capital backing. That's where I'm like, all right, we need to go take that deal, because we could wait and the deal could be worse in the future. Maybe that developer isn't at the table anymore. There could be competition that comes in that market. Other deals happen. So there's a lot of risks that come into waiting, and especially that kind of deal, you're talking about at least a year to close when you have to get annexed into mud. And just there's some of these sites have a lot of entitlement issues that just take time. And that's where you could really get hurt by trying to time the market too much and then getting on the back end of the market where maybe capital is fleeing the market because it's been a frothy time. And now this developer has had to work through all these issues and they get to the closing table and there's just no money to go close a deal. So I think that also is an important thing to look at.
It's interesting as you're talking because I'm thinking about the book 10X that we were talking about earlier. And one of his concepts is thinking about what you want versus what you need, because so many people are so focused on what they need. But then if you really think about the situation of selling your land, a lot of that thought process internally, you probably don't need to get 10 million. It's actually more of a want. But when you're thinking more about what you want versus what you need, it'll help you when you get that offer for 8 million to realize like what I really needed was like 6, because maybe I'm paying off debt or there's something going on. But then what do I really want to do? And we've sold properties and bought properties from sellers where like Mr. Smith in Houston, years ago up in the Woodlands area, a guy that was in his late 80s, World War II veteran, just an incredible guy. And he got a good price for his property. But I remember he told me, because we ended up brokering that deal and brought the buyer. He told me like, I've waited all these years to sell. He had gotten, Howard Hughes had bought everything around him and the Woodlands had basically surrounded him, just like, a hole in a donut. Incredible 50 plus acre property, really beautiful property that he had lived on since before the Woodlands was there. And he's like, he just felt like it was the right time to sell. It wasn't even really about the money. I think the money mattered because he was trying to set things up for his kids and he wanted to move because his wife had some health issues and so moved to a property that was just more conducive to that. But he was so much more introspective on what he wanted and moving and also I think we were able to form a really good relationship and became friends until he passed away. And that was part of it too. And so just somebody that wasn't so focused on just, I really want this amount of money. I don't even really have a reason that I want this kind of money. But wasn't thinking about more, I think what's a lot more important sometimes is like, what about the wants of like your time, your relationships, and your purpose? And so we run into, clients that they do think about those things. And then a lot of times the more just metrically driven, or maybe it's just more of a company, that we're working with, it's really just about getting a certain number. And they're so worried about not getting the highest number in the market. But there's a lot more that goes into that. And I think when you're talking about is now the time to sell or not, especially with more of an individual, you've got to bring in some of these other motivations than just price, because there's kind of heartache on some of these deals when you go and it doesn't close and it falls out, and it's really stressful on sellers to go through the process. There's a family that I've been working with up here that another developer put them under contract off market, not a good situation. Then another developer came, and then the city did something that we still don't think is probably legal, but no one's challenged it yet with a lawsuit. And so this poor family now is like years into tons of money on contracts, all kinds of people out surveying their property, thinking that they were going to sell. They had bought another property the first time around. Just so much that happened, that was really unfortunate. And a lot of it just, not understanding the market, not understanding that was not the right buyer to select, and just kind of getting bad advice. And so just helping these landowners try to get to what their outcome is. Like that family just really wants to sell. There's a number that's going to matter, but more than that, they just really need to get to closing. And so don't fall for the offer that's higher, but it's not going to get you to closing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's really this sort of phantom perceived loss that people have, where it's like, I've had that before. Like you're trading in the stock market, and you buy a stock and you think it's going to go to this number. And so you start to get kind of attached to this certain number or price range. I'm not going to sell until it gets that number. And then it never gets that number and it goes down, you lose money, or maybe it was at this number and I'm just holding on because I have to get this. Even if I'm making 30 or 50%, it's not enough. I got to make more because I think it's going to go up. And I think it does come from a scarcity mindset. People start thinking, this is my one chance. And I've heard that a lot. Like, this is my one chance. I gotta get every penny out of this. And we obviously want people to get every penny out of their property and maximize the price. But if you're holding on to an unrealistic idea of value and you're not doing the deal that you should be doing, that's a great deal, then you actually end up losing way more than this phantom perceived loss that you think, oh, I'm losing, $1 million, because I had 10 million in my mind and I got 9 million. When the reality is maybe their property is really worth like 7 or 8 million and we got someone to pay 9 million for it. So
it's a good point. I mean, investing is emotional. Stock market investing, I think, can be really emotional. And we've seen it with Ascent because we spend so much time on these properties we evaluate, underwriting them, putting together a package, here's the projected returns. And I think our attitude is always, okay, if we say that we're going to get a 25 IRR and like a 1.7 multiple, well, then we're going to get a 1.9 in a 40% higher. Like we're always going to go for higher than whatever we put on the page. And to your point, you don't want that to distract you from, if you can hit what you said you were going to hit, that's actually incredible. Most people don't. You don't have to overachieve every time. And so I think it can be a little bit emotional sometime. And so we have great investors, and our investors, have told us, they're like, take the quick wins, take the quick wins, even if it's not all the way to, the multiple, but maybe, probably in that case, the IRR is higher because you're doing it quicker, but they're like, take the quick wins if they're there. It's more about making the progress than achieving perfection. And I think that that was something else that stuck out to me in that 10X book. The concept of a lot of us are measuring against our goals, which is an ideal, because you should be setting very challenging goals. But a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of people listening to this podcast, they're just leaders. You're constantly frustrated because if you do hit your goal, you just make a bigger goal, and it's not that satisfying. And then if you don't hit your goal, you're frustrated you didn't hit your goal. And his point is measure from the beginning. You should constantly be looking back to the progress you've made. And that's really sustainability. And he's worked with, thousands of leaders, and leaders that measure from the beginning and see their positive progress. And that's an encouragement, kind of wind in their sails, versus the ones that are actually depressed because they constantly are looking at this ideal that can't be achieved. And then when they don't hit that ideal, they're depressed. It really interesting. I mean, one of the things he talked about was there's data to show, and he's unfortunately seen this like in his practice, the more successful a lot of his members, their kids are, like valedictorian, star of the football team, the more depressed and the more likely suicide is that they've seen, because they're so focused on perfection that's not achievable, and they're not looking at the progress they've made. And as something similar, I think, can happen in these deals where you're so focused on getting to that price, and it's like, I'm a failure, if I don't sell for that. And at the end of the day, the market's very complicated. What's going on in the market's very complicated. No person really fully understands it, no matter how smart they are. Nobody can call the future. So, our job is really just guiding through a lot of these sometimes unknown motivations and trying to help people understand what they're really trying to accomplish, and then just trying to facilitate that to a closing.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's just as we go through this topic and discuss it, I'm thinking about, we're also sitting in the chair of the seller, and we're talking as brokers, and a lot of this discussion has been our advice to sellers we're representing, but we're also a large landowner now in the state of Texas. We have a lot of sites across, the major Texas MSAs. And so we have a lot of those discussions. Do we sell now? Do we hold? And for us, a lot of times it depends on the site, depends on the submarket. I think we really look at transaction risk. If we feel like, hey, there's a real deal to be had right now, like you said, if it hits metrics that we believe are good metrics where that's a success, we want to take that deal. And you could say, man, you could hold on and get a little bit more, and maybe we can. But there's so much risk of holding on before you know it's been 7 years. And then maybe you get the same deal or maybe a worse deal. We've seen that so much in our career that if we can hit a number that we feel good about, and if we believe that there's low transaction risk and it's a real deal, it's worth spending our time on it. And so I think I would say, we're more of a group that trades. We do hold, but we're going to trade when we can. We think it's a good deal for us to trade versus just holding on for every last penny.
Yeah. And a lot of that goes back to our mindset is that we will find other properties to invest in. that this isn't all that there is. And we've been able to do that and build a business around that. And so that's exactly right. There's kind of the cheesy, like you want it to be a win-win for both parties. That's not really how most people act. Most people really just try to kind of like screw over the other side and win for themselves. But it's neat that we've been able to, like you said, when you have that trading mentality, you're just trying to do deals. It's like you find that common ground where it works. Because we know that if it doesn't work, then it's not going to actually close. So if you don't want to be biting your nails all the way to closing because they're overpaying so much or doing something that they really shouldn't be doing, that you're like afraid they're going to find that out the whole time, because they will find that out. Or, you're hiding something about your property that you don't want them to find out. So it's really that idea of, we're trading. We want this to be a win-win. Like we want a lot of times it's developers, it's our clients that are buying properties from us. And we're almost just creating this like pipeline of opportunities out there, just good sites that will be good development sites, whether it's today or in 3 years. And so we want that to be a win because we want them to come back and buy another property from us. And that's been fun. Like we've sold sites to groups. And even in just the few years we've been doing this, they've come back now on other sites that we own and put other sites under contract and are looking at other sites we own. And that speaks to just the longer term mindset of keeping that relationship positive.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to some of our conversations about, being a good seller and, people might think, well, if you're selling to your clients, you're giving them like some really good deal. Are they getting, 25% off or something like that? In a lot of cases, they're paying really good number, or in all cases, they're paying really good numbers. And in some cases, the highest numbers in those markets, but we know what helps them accomplish what they want to accomplish. And so giving them contracts that help them get deal capitalized, get designed, again, to construction loan before they start, as they start construction, just a lot of the things that really move the needle for them and help them. And I think that's allowed us to do a deal that they appreciate and they want to come back for more, but then also do a deal that benefits our investors and benefits us, where it really is a win-win situation.
Well, and maybe to start to kind of close this episode, I would say, to answer the question for us as a seller at Ascent and just properties we own that we're selling right now, I'd say probably roughly half of the properties that we own, we're aggressively selling because of the specific site, the specific market, buyer interest. We have several of those properties under contract. And then other properties that we own, it's not a great time at the moment, but we think that's going to be completely different over the next 12 to 18 months. So what we don't want to go do is go push them really, really hard in a not great market because of specific. And when I say market, I'm even meaning like micro market, sub-market, micro market. When what happens in our business is the herd mentality of it's out of favor and then it's back in favor because we bought these sites in the path of growth in good locations. Like we believe in them long-term, which is why we don't use debt. So we're able to hold them long-term if we need to. And so the idea is let's just be strategic. When we can sell, let's go sell. And then when it's just not, like we could sell these properties, but it's not a good time, let's wait on those. And so that doesn't necessarily paint it as a black and white because we're just half and half, but it kind of just gives an example of even with the same seller properties in Texas, our properties tend to be similar characteristics. There's about half that makes sense to be selling right now. And there's about half that need to mature a little bit more. And then they're going to be really well positioned.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's good.
Good. Well, thank you for listening to the podcast today. Tim, it's fun. It's fun to be recording more together. Like we've said in the past, would love to get questions from our audience. Appreciate just hearing from you. It's something that I think makes our week. I'll call Tim and be like, just talk to somebody that owns some land and, some place outside Dallas. And they came by the office and told me they listened to the podcast, and people that aren't even in the business, which is a lot of fun because I think we are passionate about this. We're interested in it. And it's a very simple business that's actually really complicated. And so it's fun. It's fun to talk about it because we could talk about it for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tom. That was good.
Thank you for listening to our podcast today. If you have questions about land you own in Texas, send us an email at texaslandguys@dmre.com and follow us on LinkedIn to stay updated.